walk. That is a way for them to learn about the environment, to have social interaction, to learn how to move their body in space. And when our kids are a little bit weaker or they're not able to move by themselves, they may not have that whole developmental experience, I guess, which contribute to their cognitive development, their language, their social interaction, and their psychosocial well-being. So like a couple of the speakers have mentioned already, it's not just about walking and standing, but it is about function and participation as well. And again, like has been mentioned today, due to falls, injury, fatigue, etc., there's a lot of things that may be a consequence of not having the right kind of supports in place, such as wheelchair equipment. So I guess this is kind of where my research was born. I saw that this was a big transition for families and for children, and I really wanted to understand more about it so we could help to support families better and to find out what their needs actually are around this time. So I started by doing a literature review to see if this had been explored yet in the literature. There is a lots of information out there for different conditions about the benefits of wheelchair use or any kind of assistive device, but there wasn't anything at the time that really looked at the parent experience or the family experience specifically. So going back a little bit to standards of care, this is one for Duchenne. So you can see that they start to recommend it at the early non-ambulatory stage. So when they start to fatigue, may start to have some falls, and are starting to consider equipment from an energy conservation perspective. In congenital muscular dystrophy, they do recommend it as well. Again, not just for walking, but to maintain function overall for development and for mobility, and they also recommend it to have anticipatory guidance around it as well. So I'll talk a little about that. Basically, it's just planning ahead and anticipating when it may be needed, so we have time to get things in place and to adjust to what it's going to mean for the family. So there too, there's a whole range of standards of care, but they do, I know congenital myopathy have a similar kind of recommendation as the congenital muscular dystrophy standards of care do as well. There isn't any, I guess, specific time point or age like DMD would, because the progression is different, but they do definitely mention it as something that should be involved in overall management. So I guess this is probably more tailored to potentially health professionals, but I guess it's also helpful for parents to know that there are things out there in the literature that can help to predict when walking may stop. And this is specifically for DMD. That it's been researched in. I haven't seen anything for other conditions. So the North Star can be used when there's a particular score, you know, they can predict that the probability that they're going to stop walking by the age of 13 years, or you can see the other assessments there within a span of 1 year, within a span of 2.4 years. So you can see it's still quite broad. You know, it's still a big window. So we're still, so we're still kind of anticipating a lot of things, and things can happen in that time. We may have a fall that can bring it forward, etc. So, but just to let you know, there are things out there. So my first study was looking at the experience for parents when it came to transitioning to the wheelchair. And as you can tell from the title, it's not just the equipment itself, it's everything that comes along with it. So I really wanted to understand, like I said, the experience for them, what the barriers and facilitators were to engaging a wheelchair prescription, and what the unmet needs were as well. And before I keep going with this, like Carolyn said at the start, I completely understand this can be a very sensitive and confronting topic. So the next couple of slides will bring up different emotions that come up. So just to prepare you for that, so definitely feel free to turn off any screens or do whatever you need to do, and remember the supports that Carolyn did mention as well. So in terms of the families that I had in my study, you can see the spread of conditions that we had, definitely more geared towards your muscular dystrophies. And also a spread of families who, when they were first recommended wheelchair equipment, a spread between those who were readily engaged to start doing trials and start exploring different options, and those who were hesitant and actively said, no, I don't want to look into this for the foreseeable future, you know, the next few months. And then we kind of break that up then, not just looking at particular conditions, but looking at whether the child was walking or not walking at the time. Again, you still see there's a split between those who are readily engaged and those who are hesitant. And then interestingly, if we look at where the families were based, geography has a part to play in it. So those who were in non-metropolitan areas were more readily able to engage in wheelchair excursion already, and those in metropolitan areas were more mixed. So that was interesting. So some of the challenges, one of the main one were the emotions that it elicits. Obviously with a lot of our conditions, there's a lot of unknowns, and the recommendation of a wheelchair I guess signifies a time point, may signify progression. Some parents said that it was a feeling of a loss of hope. It almost felt like they were abandoning a goal of walking or getting stronger. So all of those things were very, very complex. And in conditions where there is not a lot of control with what may happen in the child's disease progression, having that recommendation further emphasized that. So there's a quote here saying that because of those emotions, that was one of the main reasons they avoided the need for the wheelchair, because it was quite confronting even to have that conversation with the child about it. Again, the importance of walking, it was a goal for a lot of families to achieve walking or to prolong walking, and the recommendation of wheelchair, came with the connotation that we had to abandon that goal, which may not have necessarily been the case, but that was the weight that came behind it. And relating to what Karen would alluded to in her presentation, there was a fear that introducing a piece of equipment could have a negative consequence on walking, but which isn't the case. But there was definitely that fear there of progressing the disease faster. So this father here of a boy with FSHD says that he wanted to focus on other areas, and this recommendation was not what he wanted to hear. And then there was a process of wheelchair trials. So it can be very involved, and parents often felt unprepared for what it involved. And the idea that you've got to choose a wheelchair in a few hours that NDIS and funding bodies expect to last 5 years was very confronting. And I know when I talk about this with my colleagues at the hospital, we often say that usually we probably spend more time choosing what car we're going to buy, or if you've got a new baby, what stroller you're going to buy. You may spend hours researching it and go to different shops, but usually with wheelchair trials, equipment suppliers and funding expect you to just do that in one trial, or maybe even two. So, we're asking a lot, really. And it's overwhelming. So, Mother says here that it's a lot of people in their personal space, and then really we're not getting the best, really trusting the child's judgment because they're so overwhelmed by the process. And there's a lot of shock that goes with it. So we may not really be able to really think the best and make the best decisions in that time because it is so overwhelming. So on the flip side, things that facilitated it were just seeing how having a piece of equipment can improve participation, can improve function, independence, again, things that have been brought up by other speakers, but also seeing how positively a child responded to the experience then helped parents I guess, move beyond the emotions that they may have had. Even though it may still be lingering there, it kind of just helped them nudge them along the process a bit more. And so that's what this quote kind of highlights, that because their son embraced it, it helps them move forward, just helps them see the benefits a little bit easier. Collaboration information was a big part of it as well, having that ability to have shared decision making. Again, like I mentioned, in diseases where you may feel lost control, this was really helpful for parents to feel like they were having a say and they were part of the whole process. And then access to reliable information, such as when to consider equipment, what equipment options are out there. The internet is a great thing, but how do you know how to narrow down your searches? How do you know what is actually more beneficial for your child? And just the process of everything, of funding sources, applications, what the wait time is, which results in us having to recommend this equipment so much earlier than we would probably like to. It's because we're accommodating for all of these processes and systems. And then a key one was psychosocial support. So almost half the parents recommended that this should be included as part of the wheelchair recommendation and throughout trials. So whether that be social work or psychology input, to help families identify and assist working through their emotions and to prevent emotional crises. So like this parent says here, just being there throughout the whole process and not waiting until there's red flags or, as she says, when there's dire straits. And then so that led to my next study, and I then really wanted to see what the perspective were of health professionals, just to see if we were actually cognizant of what this experience is for families, and if we're seeing what they're seeing. So I did this in Australia and overseas. You can see the spread of health professionals here, and it was geared more towards OTs and physios. I got a lot more responses from them because they were the ones that are typically more involved in wheelchair prescription. And it was actually really, really hard for me to find psychologists that worked readily in this space. So that one psychologist in there is from our hospital at Randwick, but at all the other sites, it was, they didn't have one. So it was very similar, positively, I guess, to what the parents were experiencing. It seems like health professionals are quite cognizant of the things that are raised when a wheelchair is recommended. And the most common reasons for recommending a wheelchair was based on children showing symptoms of falls, fatigue, and really just to promote child participation and to support their development. And the majority of the time with this group, OTs and physios led those wheelchair recommendations, but did collaborate with a wider multidisciplinary team. And a third of them used standardized outcome measures to guide wheelchair initiation as well. So using the scores and the observations from their assessments. But really what they said was the experience of working with this population and their knowledge of the progression of neuromuscular conditions was what helped them to anticipate the need for this equipment. And most of the time, they tried to frame this in a positive way, so not wanting to stop walking or to abandon other functional goals, but really, like I said, to support the function and participation of the child. These are some of the standardized outcome measures that health professionals use to help their recommendations. They also used non-standardized outcome measures, and these were mostly around goal setting. And then so they also identified the same emotions that parents shared. They also raised the challenges of hope versus reality, especially with treatments and a lot of the unknowns that come with all those developments as well. When should we recommend this equipment if new things are coming up and we're anticipating that disease trajectory may change? So I guess there's that balance. And again, recommending things ahead of time and before they think the child actually really needs it, just to allow time for that adjustment, for those emotions to take their course. And again, just for the systems and funding processes that take place, and also facilitating shared decision-making with families. So just some quotes here. The psychosocial well-being was really highlighted. And so there was a lot of conversation around normalizing the emotions and making space to process those, but also highlighting that readiness from a health professional's point of view may be very different to what that means to a parent. So really, again, that shared decision-making and collaboration is very important. So like the parents raised, and I saw with recruiting for this study, the lack of psychosocial care, that wheelchair initiation is a key transition for families because it does impact so many things. Having a wheelchair can, you may need a new car, you may need certain modifications to your house, you may have to think about holidays differently, all those whole of life things. So referral to psychosocial services to have that dedicated space to really unpack and support families around that was limited and inconsistent across both healthcare systems. And all health professionals really highlighted the need to normalize psychosocial care and really to have it integrated. So not just dedicate that psychosocial informed care to social workers or to psychologists, but to have multidisciplinary professionals just aware of how to also provide that psycho-integrated care to parents and families. So like this neurologist mentioned, there's probably a lot of underlying anxiety for families. A lot of people, not just this neurologist, strongly felt that all clinics should have a way of providing support to families, particularly around certain time points of a child's disease progression. But all health systems, all different, whether it be hospital, community-based, they were all limited by funding and resources. So that was a definite gap that was identified. And then again, just all the processes around wheelchair applications. It usually takes 1 year or more in both health systems. And you're having to coordinate multiple stakeholders, so families, equipment suppliers, the therapists, and then you add on to that potential funding delays, having to reapply if there's any rejections or requests for more information. There's different equipment available in different areas, so what's available in metropolitan may be different to what's available in rural, so that discrepancy between what options are available for families. And then once you have a wheelchair, in Australia specifically, there is limited funding for home and vehicle modifications as well. So yeah, the whole gamut of things that come along with it. And then so this brings me now to my third study, and then I'll go into some more practical strategies in the coming slides. But what I'm doing now is based on the feedback from parents and also from health professionals. We've put together a booklet that addresses a lot of the emotional needs and barriers that were raised, and also highlighting that reliable information that families are looking for. So what does the process of wheelchair trial actually involve? What does the process of, what options are actually out there? What are the pros and cons of different kinds of pieces of equipment that can help me brainstorm and decision make what I think would be best for my child and our family's needs. So hopefully a lot of practical information around that. And so what my study is looking at now is evaluating its effectiveness. We did a pilot study and we asked 10 families to evaluate it for us. We made some changes based on that initial feedback. And now we're rolling it out across the pediatric hospitals that have neuromuscular clinics on the east coast of Australia. And our hope is once we get that feedback back, then we can make whatever changes need to be made, and then we can roll it out to all the clinics as an ongoing resource, and potentially putting it on the loop. That's something that I've also learned about today. So just making it more accessible. So yeah, if you know anyone that may be interested, I'm still recruiting until the end of the year. That is my shameless plug for the day. I'm very keen to get feedback about this resource. So this is still version 1, but just to give you an idea of what's in there, again, highlighting some of the thoughts and feelings that can arise from this equipment, and on that right side, some of the pros and cons. So I really wanted to make it practical for families, and wanted it, and health professionals who may not be familiar with this space either. So being something that's helpful to both sides of the equation, but something that you can go to in your own time as well, because that's something that was raised, that it is a lot of information and you can only take in so much. So having something that you can go to, there's notes pages in there, so you can write down questions, bring it back to your team, and really facilitate that shared decision making and collaboration. So that's a bit of a snapshot of what it includes. So now onto some practical considerations. So anticipatory care is definitely something that is important, mostly from a funding and systems perspective, but like I've really come to learn just from a family perspective, to really allow time for any grief that may be around it, even just some adjustments like a social adjustment acceptance, and really collaborating with a whole range of health professionals and integrating those who may be more better able to support families in a psychosocial way into wheelchair appointments. And I know that can be really tricky in community. When I was doing this based in the hospital, it would have been a lot easier, even though it still would have had its challenges. But I can appreciate that in NDIS world, this may be even more difficult. But that is a way, you know, that's also a call out to really collaborate with your clinics that are hospital based as well, to see if you can have any supports that way. One of the things that came up when I was doing, a window's popped up, so I'm just going to close that.
Looks like we're getting kicked out in 1 minute.
Okay, I'm going to skip this one because it's probably less important compared to the other slides I have. So one of the things that came up is the understanding of a wheelchair trial. And one of the questions I get from families as well as health professionals who may not have as much experience in this space is, what wheelchair model should my child have? And my answer to that is, we really need to think about what the family's needs are and what the goals are for the child, because like wheelchairs, they will all do similar things, really. And it's not that there's one particular model that's a standout for a certain condition, but it's, you know, is your child's goals, do they need more supportive seating? Do we need it to be lightweight because you're going to be taking in and out of the boot a lot? Do you live on rough terrain? Do you live on, you know, sloped